Good morning. This is Playing to Win with Mark Henderson Leary and my good friend, Brad Freyer. How are you, sir?
I'm wonderful. How are you? That wasn't quite the usual. You must be either sliding in on two wheels or just worn out from the long weekend.
Sliding into two wheels. Maybe my voice isn't warmed up. It wasn't close. I was trying to give the intensity without sort of the monster truck feel and see what happened there. And I'm trying to get this camera to be at a better angle. And so, yeah, I'm all over the place. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. Yeah, it was a good weekend. Enjoyed the weather. Got outside. Got a lot done. So
yeah, what'd you do?
Yeah.
What did you do that was so good, so useful?
Just piddling around the house. You know, I'm usually a day after Thanksgiving decorate for Christmas guy. Been that way for 20 years. Morning after Thanksgiving, put the headphones in and just grind it out. And I do it all day. And if it's not out by the end of the weekend after Thanksgiving, it's not going out. And so this year I decided to give myself a little bit of a break, and I started hauling stuff down this weekend. So a little bit of a jump start.
Well, that's good. So speaking of jump start, I feel like we've got a lot to cover today. So I want to get right into it because this is the week of Thanksgiving. So
it is.
Which, shocker, I want to talk about gratitude. I want to talk about the holiday, I guess. I want to talk about some of the things behind that. And I think we've got just a little hair above one metric shit ton of stuff to cover. So let's get right into the issue. So it's what I believe that there is an exceedingly elusive, aspirational ideal, which I guess is maybe redundant, state of mind that is pervasive, using lots of syllables this morning.
Big words for Monday morning.
Amongst coaching and self-help. And I think that I was going to try to quiz you on it, but I realized it'd probably just create awkwardness because I'm setting it up in a weird way. And that is gratitude.
Quiz away.
What do you think? That was the question. What do you think the most aspirational, overused, trite sort of emotion, state of mind is? And I believe it's this concept of gratitude. That almost everything I've read, not everything, a whole lot of things I've read in the last 2 or 3 years have talked about the importance of gratitude in well-being and happiness. And I think that. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's the word I was thinking when you were talking about the most aspirational, vision. I think happiness is what people are constantly trying to redefine and pursue.
Yeah.
But I think where you're going with this is if you're not present and grateful for where you are, then happiness is not going to be achieved because you're going to seek happiness as the destination versus happiness as a state of mind along the way.
Yes, and I think that's what the science tells us. But all of the exercises of finding gratitude, of writing them down, and all that, I've done a lot of that. It's been a crazy decade for me, and so lots of things up and down. And I had a weird experience that was just humbling, somewhat recently.
Okay,
because. Going back in time a little bit, have you ever had one of those experiences in life where you just really hoped it was a nightmare and that you were going to wake up from it? I mean, literally. Because people who go through sudden unexpected divorces, loss of a loved one, really bad breakups, really bad economic situations where there's days or weeks on end where it's like, this can't be real. This can't really be happening to me. I can't be suffering through this every day. And if someone's listening to this and experiencing that, my heart goes out because I've been there, and it is really, really hard to keep moving. And then you get a book or a meditation or something like, find gratitude. Find one thing that helps you through that. And I actually had I've had all those days. I've had those weeks and months and years and ground through that, and I've done all that work. Right. And it's been like this much help at a time that accumulates actually. So where I'm going with this is that I was driving home and I I got my glasses that are somewhat new, and it was dark, and I had this weird experience where the light hit my glasses in a way where I saw two people walking along the side of the road, and their faces looked blurry to me. And it took me to this weird place where, is this a dream? Because I was a little tired, and so I kind of had I could kind of believe, like, the reality had separated just a little bit, and I thought, you ever had those lucid dreams where you're like, this isn't a dream, right? This is real, and you wake up and it's a dream. So I thought, is this that moment? Is this that kind of thing? And where I was terrified is that, what if I woke up and all the things that were true about my life were not? And how much of a loss I would feel. And I was fearful that I was going to wake up back in those times where I was working my way up the mountain. And I was just so afraid that what I had, and all of the things in my world, my family and my work and all aspects of my family and work, are just at the peak for me. And I can't be more grateful for that. And I had this really high contrast moment of like, what if it was all not real, as opposed to in the past where I'm like, why won't this nightmare go away? Please be a nightmare. But I didn't have that. So it was exceedingly humbling to have come this far and feel that way. So I just want to say thank you to the universe and everybody in my world who's helped make that happen, because it's definitely not, I've worked really hard, but when you get to that stage, you have to admit that, like, it's not all you. There's definitely other people and other things at work.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's go back to where this kind of started and pivoted to the dream scenario. But, because I do think that's an important message of, the despair, the separation between happiness and thankfulness, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, similar to you, I've had a couple of rough years along the way that just, the hits just kept rolling. And you'd wake up and be like, really? This also? Okay, we're going to throw this on top. Okay, all right, let's keep it coming, whatever. And it does. It really weighs you down. It's heavy on the chest. It keeps you up at night. It's all consuming during the day in your head, if you allow it to be. But I think something you said was important for everyone, including us, to remember, which is, those moments of gratitude, although they can be minuscule at the time, if practiced and repeated, can grow and can have compounding interest. And so, no, I think gratitude is a huge piece of the puzzle for mental health, physical health, for just being present, for not constantly saying, well, I'll be happy when, or I'd be happy if, or everything will be good when, right? Everything's, we're unfortunately in an environment, whether you call it consumerism or, social media, the weight of social media, where everybody wants what they don't have. Everybody has this vision of what they want to achieve, and they're not happy until they get there. But then either the cheese gets moved and the dream changes, and so they still are pursuing or chasing. So
you challenged me, maybe unknowingly, probably unknowingly, definitely unknowingly. You mentioned, I think it was last time we spoke, about you had either read the book or had been tipped off to the concepts out of The Gap and the Gain.
Yeah. And
I explained it one way, and you explained, well, there's another missing piece, and that left it a little problem in my mind, a splinter in my mind that, like, apparently I don't know all the concepts. So I read the book, and so now I'm an expert. And and so for those of you listening who don't know, the book is The Gap and the Gain, inspired by Dan Sullivan, researched and written, co-authored with Ben Hardy, who is just, so they're sort of like the opposite ends of the spectrum. Ben Hardy's a psychologist, and Dan Sullivan is kind of this introspective coach type. I mean, he runs an organization called Strategic Coach, and so he's helping people get out of their own way by sort of exposing people to his own journey of how he's gotten out of his own way and living his best life. And so it's a sort of intuitive leadership and the scientific leadership coming together. But the concept is, and so I want to leave. I think there's two tips I want to leave with people, but this is the second one of them, and that is this idea of always measuring backwards. because when he describes the gap versus the gain, which as you were talking about, the gap is the difference between where we are and where we want to be, which talking about the horizon, you're always driving towards the horizon. And when you get to the horizon, well, where's the horizon? Well, nowhere near yet.
Never get to the horizon.
Still on the horizon.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of ambitious achievers. And Dan's finding was sort of stimulated from the idea of like working around all of these high achievers and finding that the more high achieving these people were, more consistently they were less happy with their lives, and that makes no sense, right? So we've got a very aggressive carrot in front of us. We keep going after it more and more aggressively, and that's I think you can get through your teenage and 20s and maybe even your early 30s and feeling like the velocity of your life is a good thing, but once you get in your 40s and 50s, you're like, am I making any progress here? And so the gap starts to seem further away. And so his recommendation, and based on the science and based on experiences, is that if you stop and you look backwards and you realize, oh my God, how far have I come? That not only is that a better measure of what is actually happening, it actually creates a positive feedback loop of your effort to output. So it actually doesn't work against you. For those of you who listen to this and say like, well, I'm not going to take an easy win. I've still got so much to do. It's actually quite fueling to look back and realize, oh my gosh, I made progress. So when I go back to work in terms of going to the gym mentally, physically, metaphorically in my work, gains actually come from that, and I should feel good.
Yeah, and not only that, but I think people really do take for granted where they are. Interestingly enough, in the last month, I've had 3 different conversations with 3 different people who are, for all accounts, crushing it. Right?
Yeah.
Whether it's because they've amassed amazing fortune through different means, whether it's because they have a job that they are at the absolute pinnacle of their profession and their earning potential, but yet each of those 3 conversations, they all expressed this dissatisfaction with where they were. And we're asking, well, where can I go? How could I do what?
Yeah.
The things and talking about the things they didn't have. And, in all 3 of them, look, and I've been there too. So this isn't me, being some holier than thou, I know better, but I've been there. I get it. Hell, we always battle with that. Right. But from the outside looking in, I asked one of them, I was like, well, any idea where you fall on the earning spectrum, right? And they were like, well, no. So you're in the top 1%, maybe top 1.5% in the world as far as earners go, right? You're making more than 99% of the population. Is that not something that you should be proud of and have a sense of accomplishment? Rather than, well, I want more. There was this unsettled sense that, but I want more. That's great. There's nothing wrong with aspiring for more, but take a moment to really keep things in perspective as to what you've accomplished, right?
Yeah.
Or spending time with a friend who's done amazing things, and I really want to do this, or I really want to get that, and I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Like, look at all that you've amassed. Look at all that you have. Are you really worried about that? Is that really what you're going to let gnaw on you and consume your thoughts? I mean, maybe some of it's boredom because, it's become easy. And so you got to have something to fill your mind with, but why not fill it with, appreciation and gratitude and reflection on where you have come.
Agreed. So that's where I'm, because I've been on that path for so long. I want to do that. What I find is it's sometimes difficult to do that. It's an ideal, and as I started this off saying, I think it's an ideal that's somewhat elusive for people. Yeah. And so I think the two things I want to really hammer home are that the discipline of small increments, it works. It builds up, because, I say that actually, and I think I'll kind of contradict myself by saying that, I don't know if all of it works, but I do know I did it. I do know that I did it consistently over and over again. And I got to the point where now, wow, I'm super grateful. So that's the first piece.
Talk about it.
So the discipline of taking a great point. So things like, so great. Let's slow that down. Those disciplines, meaning small sacrifices that are formulaic in getting the results that I want. So let's slow that down. So my definition of discipline, or some people refer to it as self-discipline, but I just mean the idea of consistently following the path that's most likely to create the success that you want, right? So to me, discipline is following the path most likely to create the success and happiness or outcome or whatever you want. So that is very sophisticated. It's not copying Jocko Willink's workout routine. If you don't have 4 a.m. on your watch when you post, that's not a failure if that's not the life you're trying to create. So the first step of the process is get clear on what you want, and then follow the steps, those little sacrifices. That's what they are, little sacrifices, which to me, the definition of sacrifice is not doing something in favor of getting something you want more. So you have to really have this equation. And sacrificing isn't just sort of like starving yourself of fun stuff. It is managing a budget of time and energy of things that you really want and things you don't want as much. And so you have to kind of say no to things very intentionally, so you're saying yes to something else. So all those little disciplines have to be, if there's one discipline I think that brings it home, and there's lots of ways to do this, but I think there's one thing that makes you kind of get this all figured out is journaling. And if in journaling, and I know you like that one, right? It is saying, okay, what the hell am I going to write? and so the dominoes of like, well, what am I trying to get? What am I not happy with? What do I want to be happy with? And sometimes it starts with the most terribly basic of scribbles of like, I just want to make 3 calls tomorrow. Like, I just want to be a little bit better. And then
and I would even take it a half step back, Mark, because for people who've heard the concept of journaling, and for those who haven't heard the concept of journaling, journaling is basically, it's not a diary, it's not a what did I do, it's not a it's really creating, it's manifesting what you want to become, and identifying the things that you need to do to get there, but also acknowledging and appreciating where you are and what you've achieved. And there's a lot of different formats that you can take. There's some formats of journals that are very structured. Hey, enter this information here, this here. There's some that are just very free flow. You and I have talked about journaling before. I'm a free flow guy. I try to write one 6x8 page a day. But for a lot of people say, where do you start? How do you start journaling? Because it's horribly awkward. It's horribly uncomfortable. I don't know what to write. I always tell people just to write about why they journal as a place to start.
Oh, yeah.
I journal because I believe it's going to help me become a better person. I journal because Mark said so. I journal because,
And I trust Mark to help me get where I want to go. So I love what you're saying there. It's really causes some, it's like, there must be a reason I sat down here right now. Yeah. And I may not know what it is, but that's it.
Yeah. So getting into the habit of just writing, because it is very unnatural for most of us who've never done it before to just start writing about our feelings and our thoughts. What's interesting is I've said this for, almost 20 years teaching journaling. I've never shared my journal with anyone. Because if I shared it with someone and let people read it, I would write with the thought that someone's going to read it someday.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I did a talk for American Staffing Association in Colorado 2 months ago, and it was a women in leadership session that I spoke to. And I talked about journaling. So we've got 120 very successful women in this room, and we're talking about journaling, right? This isn't something that's for people who are struggling. This isn't something for people who haven't made it. This is for anybody. And in fact, I shared that video with my daughter. My oldest daughter's in college, and I sent her this video. I said, hey, watch this video. There's a lot of good content in it. If you don't like it, just turn it off. And she watched it. And one of the takeaways she had was she said, Dad, I've never thought about what you said about not sharing my journal. And she goes, the stuff that I write, historically, I've been thinking, I write it
for an imaginary audience.
Right. Or with this filter of what do I want people to read about me? What do I want people to think about me? Versus being vulnerable, being honest with yourself, and being candid, right? And the journaling is not something that you should, if you want to, that's great. But
I hear what you're saying. I think it's a choice. I think sometimes people would say you want to sort of live into your aspirational best self with that sense of observation. But I like what you're saying. I think you should choose. Do you want to? Are you manifesting? And if it is a filter, is it the right filter? But I do think that you should be. If you're going to be vulnerable and transparent and authentic in your life, you should start with yourself, right? So get comfortable with that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I haven't gone back and read mine in forever, but there's some stuff in there that, I certainly, wouldn't feel comfortable with people reading just because it's very vulnerable, it's personal, and I wouldn't want people to.
A lot of the stuff that I read, I'll pull it out. It doesn't even make sense to me anymore, and so it definitely wouldn't make sense to other people. Sometimes it's shorthand, sometimes it's abbreviations, and I use a first name, and I'm like, who the hell? Yeah.
But dovetailing off of what you were talking about with gratitude, right? My journal always starts with a couple of sentences of gratitude and appreciation, right? And so I'll talk about things I'm grateful for or I'm appreciative of, and then I go into the body of my journal, which is what am I trying to purge? What's the head trash I'm trying to get out of? Who's the new person I'm trying to create? What vision? What self-talk am I trying to establish? And then I usually end with some sort of, go get 'em, tiger kind of thing.
Yeah. So I like the gratitude. It's that a lot of people have gratitude journals. There's a whole gratitude journal approach. I want to hopefully give the listeners one more tip on how to make that even one tick easier if that's hard. Because sometimes it's if you pull out the journal and it's your first day and you can think back through all of time, sometimes it's easier to find some stuff you're grateful for. 27 days in, you're like, I woke up. I'd repeat the same thing. Hey. So yeah, sometimes, but it feels a little, it's always felt a little inauthentic to me if I'm putting these sort of not very, maybe it's the filter you're talking about, but, or just, I think I'm even feeling fraudulent with myself. Dan Sullivan talks about I think I might be getting his words wrong, but the idea is less about gratitude and more about progress. And he's like, just what are the 3 wins? And less about some sort of ideal of gratitude. Thank the universe, thank the individual, thank that really difficult person I dealt with for giving me a new. Less about how to keep calm. I really wanted to punch them and I didn't, and I'm grateful for that. But that maybe, but let's just take that. I think there's a godliness to that makes it seem harder. I think it is harder actually to find that a Zen I'm so grateful. Just measure progress, something in the right direction. Give yourself a pat. You may not even like it. You might be like, I'm so pissed off that I only made a little bit of progress, but it is progress. It is it's a tiny win, like an maddeningly tiny win, but it's a tiny win. And so that is the habit you want to build. And it goes back to that concept. I briefly mentioned it, but I really want this burden in your brain leaving this. Always measure backward. Totally break the habit of measuring forward. We're going to do prediction. That you should do that when you're setting goals. Look forward. What can you do? But once you set those goals, then you measure backward every single time. Have I made progress? Little progress, not a lot of progress. Use that feedback of, okay, I'm at least going the right direction in these areas. And that is the fuel that eventually can put you into a state of gratitude, I think. But don't set the bar that high. I don't think. I think, really set it to what was the progress. And if you can get your measurement equipment, your brain, your psyche to consistently look to what progress we're making, you're in what Dan calls the gain. If you're always in the gain, you're always seeing the win and you're always fueling more and more progress, and you become a positive creature for those around you because you can only see the progress and the positivity. Look how far you've come. Look how far I've come. Look how far we've all come, as opposed to being always, look how we're not anywhere near where we're supposed to be.
Well, and here's the other thing, right? I mean, because you made a great point. So I totally agree, and it is the small improvements, it's the little things that we can't lose sight of. I think tongue in cheek, you said I woke up this morning, but there really needs to be a piece of us that also doesn't take simple things for granted, right? I mean, the fact that I read it recently. I'm gonna butcher it, but there's someone somewhere who would die for what we have right now.
Yeah.
Right. And whether that's just physically, hey, you know what? I got out of bed without pain this morning. I got a workout in. I was able to, eat breakfast. There's the simple things in life that there's someone right now that doesn't have that. I think don't take for granted the simple things, right?
Yeah.
If you're in a healthy relationship, if you have your health, if you're employed in a job that you just absolutely don't disdain, if you have hobbies that you appreciate, if you have friends, if you have family, if you have, all those things that you probably take for granted on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Those are the things that, at least for me in the challenging times, it keeps things in perspective. Right. One of my favorite sayings that I wish I could remember who told me so I could give them credit. But they said, if you have a problem that money can solve, you don't have a problem. Right. Because there's people out there that have problems that all the money in the world can't solve.
Yeah.
Those are problems.
So
if you are in a financial tough spot, or those are problems that can be solved. It might be painful.
Yeah.
You might have to do things you don't want to do, but you can solve them.
Yeah. So I think that what I've discovered is that sometimes it's easier to reach that than others. And I think the gap in the gain concept is sort of the secret behind that. If you want to feel grateful that you can walk, it's hard to do that when you're running and having people pass you while they run. And you're like, and so that's the gap in the gain. The gain is the gap is I'm not running like them. The gain is, I remember I couldn't run more than 3 miles, and today is going to be a 6 mile easy run. And so really getting that filter plugged into the gain of understanding, my relationship with my spouse isn't as great as Joey and Sally. They vacation 10 times a year. It's go backwards and say, we didn't used to go out on any dates, and look at how great the last 4 dates have been.
Mark, let me tell you something. I think that is one of the biggest problems with our society today is social media has skewed everybody's perspective on what reality is, because everybody on social media is posting their best 2% of life.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
And so you see all these people's best 2%, and you culminate it into a human being. And now you're comparing your life to all these hundreds or thousands of people, their best 1%. And so now you're looking around going, man, my life really must suck, because look at all these vacations these people are taking. We're not reading the tea leaves and looking at, hey, Mark's in Tahiti right now and he's having a great vacation. Yeah, but maybe Mark hadn't taken a vacation in 7 years. Maybe he's been in a battle of his life for, with his health or with his spouse, and they're taking a vacation because they needed to get. We can't look at the people running past us. We can't look at those 45-year overnight successes, right, and go, oh, why can't I do that? We have to. I couldn't agree with you more. Number one is we have to define our own goals, our own path, our own definition of success, and then you have to look at what you've done versus what you don't have.
Absolutely.
And where you haven't gone. I couldn't agree more.
So let's wrap it up. We're out of time. We got to do that. But I got to say, I couldn't be more grateful for life and all things that are going on. And I've seen it's been a very inconsistent race. The clients, the people I've worked with for the last 2 years, some people had their very best years in 2020. And then it only got better in 2021. Some people had horrible years and still having horrible years. And so everybody's very different races. And I'm just so grateful to be living my best life right now in all aspects. I mean, and I know it hadn't been all that way all my life, and it won't stay that way. There'll be ups and downs, peaks and valleys. So for people listening, two tools, the two things that come out of this: starting small, really finding that simple, basic discipline to give order and credit to yourself. If you're finding it hard to build that habit, and if you need some inspiration, feel free to check out Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. That's my go-to for getting the sense of how to find smallest win in the darkest of times. I love that stuff. But flip that around for those of you who might have reason to believe that you might be crushing it by many objective standards, but you don't feel great inside for some reason. That's Dan Sullivan's Gap in the Gain. Go there. Learn to measure backwards and really start tuning in to understanding that gap from the future. It's infinite. It literally can't run out amount of more stuff for you to achieve. There is no way for you not to feel bad by pouring yourself into the gap. If you measure the progress and check out Gap in the Gain and that kind of stuff, or reach out to Brad or myself for any tips or thoughts on that. But that's our time. Any closing thoughts, Brad? It was a
happy Thanksgiving. Be thankful.
Indeed. And always measure backwards. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much, guys.